The Haitian Revolution's global impact. The Haitian Revolution was the only successful slave revolt in history that resulted in the establishment of an independent nation. It began in 1791 when enslaved Africans in the French colony of Saint-Domingue rose up against their oppressors. The revolution lasted 13 years and culminated in Haiti, declaring independence in 1804. The revolt was led by figures like Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who commanded formerly enslaved people against French, British, and Spanish forces. The success of the revolution sent shockwaves through colonial powers across Europe and the Americas. Plantation owners in the United States, Caribbean colonies, and South America feared similar uprisings among their enslaved populations. This fear led to deliberate suppression of Haitian revolt. Illusionary history in Western education systems. Textbooks minimized or omitted the revolution's significance, while diplomatic isolation and economic sanctions punished Haiti for decades. The revolution proved that enslaved people could defeat professional European armies and govern themselves, a narrative that threatened the entire foundation of slavery and colonialism. France even forced Haiti to pay reparations for lost slave property, a debt that crippled the nation's economy for over a century. The Kingdom of Kush. The Kingdom of Kush was an ancient African civilization located in what is now Sudan, existing from around 1070 BCE to 350 CE. Kush developed along the Nile River south of Egypt and became one of Africa's most powerful kingdoms. The Kushites conquered Egypt around 747 BCE and ruled as the 25th dynasty for nearly a century. During this period, Kushite pharaohs restored Egyptian temples, revived pyramid construction, and defended Egypt against Assyrian invasions. Kush possessed advanced metallurgical technology, particularly in iron production, which gave them military advantages over neighboring civilizations. The kingdom's capital cities, first Napata and later Meroe, featured pyramids that predated many Roman architectural achievements. Kushite architecture included massive temples, palaces, and distinctive steep-sided pyramids. The civilization developed its own writing system called Meroitic script, which remains only partially deciphered. Kush controlled valuable trade routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean world, trading gold, ivory, ebony, and incense. The kingdom's military prowess and cultural sophistication rivaled contemporary civilizations, yet Western historians often relegated Kush to footnotes or portrayed it as merely an Egyptian vassal state, rather than acknowledging its independent power and influence. Greenwood District Massacre. The Greenwood District Massacre occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma, over May 31st and June 1st, 1921. Greenwood was a prosperous African-American neighborhood known as Black Wall Street due to its concentration of Black-owned businesses, banks, hotels, theaters, and professional services. The violence began after a young black man named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white elevator operator, an allegation that was likely fabricated or exaggerated. White mobs gathered at the courthouse, demanding Rowland be lynched. Armed Black World War I veterans arrived to protect Rowland, and confrontations escalated into a full-scale assault on Greenwood white rioters. Some, deputized by city officials, invaded the district with firearms and incendiary devices. Aircraft were used to drop firebombs on buildings and fleeing residents. Over the course of 18 hours, white mobs systematically burned down 35 city blocks, destroying over 1,200 homes and businesses. Hundreds of African Americans were killed, though exact numbers remain unknown, as bodies were disposed of in mass graves and the Arkansas River. Over 10,000 black residents were left homeless, and nearly $2 million in property damage occurred, equivalent to over $30 million today. No white rioters were ever convicted. Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was born into slavery in 1838 in Arkansas and escaped to Indian Territory during the Civil War. He lived among Creek and Seminole tribes, learning their languages and tracking skills. After the war, Reeves became a deputy U.S. Marshal in 1875, serving the Western District of Arkansas under Judge Isaac Parker. He was the first black deputy marshal west of the Mississippi River over his 32-year career. Reeves arrested more than 3,000 felons and killed 14 outlaws in self-defense. He was known for his disguises, often posing as outlaws, homeless drifters, or cowboys to capture criminals. Reeves could not read or write, but possessed an exceptional memory for warrants and legal documents, which were read to him. He operated throughout 75,000 square miles of Indian Territory, facing extreme dangers from outlaws, harsh weather, and racial prejudice. Reeves once arrested his own son for murder, demonstrating his commitment to justice over personal ties. Despite his legendary accomplishments, his story was largely omitted from history books. Many historians believe Reeves inspired the fictional character of the Lone Ranger, though he never received credit during his lifetime. The Zanj Rebellion. The Zanj Rebellion was a massive slave revolt that occurred in southern Iraq from 869 to 883 CE during the Abbasid Caliphate. The term Zanj referred to enslaved people brought from East Africa to work in brutal conditions, draining salt marshes and cultivating sugarcane plantations near Basra. These enslaved Africans worked in groups of 500 to 5,000, performing backbreaking labor in extreme heat with minimal food and shelter. The rebellion was led by Ali ibn Muhammad, a Persian who claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad's family and promised the enslaved workers freedom and equality. At its height, the rebellion involved over 500,000 participants who seized control of several cities, including Basra, one of the most important commercial centers in the Islamic world. The rebels established their own capital city, called Mokhtara, and created a functioning state with its own administration and military. They defeated multiple caliphate armies and controlled the region for 14 years. The rebellion disrupted trade routes and threatened Baghdad itself. The Abbasid Caliphate eventually crushed the revolt in 883 CE, destroying Mokhtara and killing Ali ibn Muhammad. The rebellion's scale and success remain largely unknown. Unknown outside academic circles, obscured in Western narratives of Islamic and African history. Henrietta Lacks's immortal cells. Henrietta Lacks was a black woman from Baltimore who died of cervical cancer in 1951 at age 31. Before her death at Johns Hopkins Hospital, doctors removed tissue samples from her tumor without her knowledge or consent, a common practice with black patients at the time. Researcher George Gay discovered that Lacks's cells, unlike normal human cells that died after a few divisions, could survive and reproduce indefinitely in laboratory conditions. These immortal cells were designated HeLa cells, named from the first two letters of her first and last names. HeLa cells became the first immortalized human cell line and revolutionized medical research. They were used to develop the polio vaccine, advance cancer research, study viruses, test medication effects, examine human biology in space, and facilitate in vitro fertilization techniques. Scientists have grown over 20 tons of HeLa cells, and these cells have been involved in over 75,000 studies. The cells generated billions of dollars for pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. Lacks's family learned about the cell's existence 20 years after her death and received no compensation or recognition for decades. The ethical violations involved in taking Lacks's cells without consent highlighted systemic racism in medical research and patient rights issues that persist today. The Black Panthers community programs. The Black Panther Party was founded in Oakland, California in 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. While mainstream media focused on images of armed Panthers and confrontations with police, the organization operated extensive community service programs that were systematically overlooked or suppressed. The Free Breakfast for Children program, started in 1969, served free meals to thousands of children before school in black communities across America. At its peak, the program fed over 10,000 children daily in dozens of cities. The Panthers established free health clinics that provided medical care, testing for sickle cell anemia, and health education in underserved communities. They organized free clothing drives, transportation services for elderly people visiting incarcerated family members, and ambulance services. The Panthers created liberation schools offering Black history curriculum, political education, and cultural programming that public schools neglected. They provided free legal aid and advocated for tenant rights against exploitative landlords. The party's newspaper reached circulation of 250,000 copies. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called the Panthers the greatest threat to national security and launched COINTELPRO operations to dismantle the organization through infiltration, false propaganda, and violent raids. Government agencies deliberately emphasized the Panthers' militant image while suppressing coverage of their social programs. Mansa Musa's wealth. Mansa Musa was the emperor of the Mali Empire, who ruled from 1312 to 1337. He inherited a kingdom that controlled significant gold and salt trade routes across West Africa. Musa is considered possibly the wealthiest person in human history, with estimated wealth exceeding $400 billion in today's currency, though exact figures are impossible to determine. In 1324, Musa embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca, traveling with a caravan of 60,000 people, including soldiers, officials, merchants, and enslaved people. He brought 80 to 100 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold. During his journey through Cairo, Musa distributed so much gold to the poor and in markets that he caused massive inflation throughout the Mediterranean economy. Gold prices in Egypt took 12 years to recover from the surplus Musa introduced. His generosity was so legendary that it appeared in European and Middle Eastern maps and chronicles for centuries. Musa expanded the Mali Empire's territory, established universities in Timbuktu, and commissioned architectural projects, including the Jingwareber Mosque. Timbuktu became a renowned center of Islamic scholarship, attracting scholars from across the Muslim world. Despite his extraordinary wealth and influence, Mansa Musa's story has been marginalized in Western education, with African empires often portrayed as primitive or non-existent. The Tulsa Race Massacre cover-up. Following the 1921 Greenwood District Massacre, a systematic cover-up began immediately. Local newspapers that reported the events had those editions destroyed or removed from archives. The Tulsa Tribune's article that allegedly sparked the violence disappeared entirely. Death certificates were altered or destroyed to conceal the true number of casualties. Mass graves were dug throughout the city, with bodies buried without identification or record. Insurance companies refused to pay claims from Black property owners. Citing riot exclusions and policies, city ordinances were quickly passed requiring expensive building permits that prevented many Black residents from rebuilding. The event was removed from Oklahoma history textbooks and was not taught in schools for decades. Survivors were threatened into silence, and many white Tulsans maintained a pact of silence about the massacre. Official reports minimized the violence or blamed Black residents for initiating the conflict. It wasn't until the 1990s that historians began serious investigations into what happened. In 1997, the Oklahoma legislature established the Tulsa Race Riot Commission to investigate. Ground-penetrating radar identified potential mass grave sites in 2020. Nearly a century after the massacre, excavations have uncovered remains, but identification efforts continue. The suppression ensured generations of Americans never learned about one of the worst incidents of racial violence in U.S. history, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The Tuskegee syphilis study was a medical experiment conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972 in Macon County, Alabama. Researchers recruited 600 impoverished African American men, 399 with syphilis and 201 without the disease as a control group. The men were told they were receiving free health care for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. They were never informed they had syphilis, and researchers deliberately withheld diagnosis information. The study's purpose was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis. Even after penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis in 1947, researchers actively prevented participants from receiving treatment. Public health service doctors gave participants placebos, aspirin, and diagnostic procedures like painful spinal taps, which were misrepresented as treatments. Researchers went so far as to prevent participants from receiving treatment through other medical programs and World War II draft board examinations. 28 men died directly from syphilis, 100 died from related complications, 40 wives were infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. The experiment continued until 1972, when whistleblower Peter Buxton leaked information to the TWA. The press. Public outrage led to the study's termination, a $10 million settlement, and establishment of the Office for Human Research Protections. President Clinton formally apologized in 1997. Madam C.J. Walker's empire. Madam C.J. Walker was born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 in Louisiana to formerly enslaved parents. She became America's first female self-made millionaire. Through her hair care empire, Walker experienced hair loss from poor diet, stress, and damaging hair products, which inspired her to develop her own scalp treatment. In 1905, she created a line of hair care products specifically for Black women, including the Walker system of hair treatment. She sold products door-to-door initially, then expanded through mail order and trained sales agents. Walker established Lelia College in Pittsburgh to train her sales representatives, who became known as Walker agents. She eventually employed over 3,000 people, mostly Black women, providing them economic independence and entrepreneurial opportunities. By 1917, Walker's company generated over $500,000 in annual revenue, equivalent to over $10 million today. She built a factory, hair salon, and training school in Indianapolis. Walker was also a philanthropist, donating to Black schools, orphanages, and civil rights organizations, including the NAACP. She used her wealth and influence to advocate against lynching and for Black economic empowerment. Despite her groundbreaking business success, Walker's story was largely excluded from mainstream business history textbooks, which focused almost exclusively on white male entrepreneurs. Her achievements challenged narratives about Black capability and women's business acumen. The Battle of Vertières. The Battle of Vertières took place on November 18, 1803, near Cap Haitien in northern Haiti. It was the final major battle of the Haitian Revolution and Haitian Independence War against France. French forces under General Rochambeau faced revolutionary troops, led by Jean-Jacques Dessalines and other former enslaved generals. Napoleon had sent over 40,000 soldiers to reconquer Saint-Domingue and restore slavery after it had been abolished during the Revolution. The French forces established fortifications at Vertières, but revolutionary forces, numbering around 27,000, launched a decisive assault. The battle was particularly fierce, with revolutionary soldiers charging French defensive positions despite heavy casualties. Many revolutionaries had been enslaved on plantations and were fighting to prevent their re-enslavement. The battle lasted several hours, and French forces eventually retreated to their ships. French casualties were significant, and the defeat made it clear that France could not maintain control of the colony. On November 19th, Rochambeau signed a capitulation agreement, and French forces evacuated. The victory at Vertières led directly to Haiti declaring independence on January 1st, 1804. This battle represented formerly enslaved people defeating one of the world's most powerful military forces. The Battle of Vertières remains largely unknown in Western military history, despite its significance in ending European colonial presence in Haiti and forcing Napoleon to abandon ambitions in the Americas. Juneteenth's delayed freedom. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states legally free. However, The proclamation's enforcement depended on Union military presence and control. Texas, being the westernmost Confederate state, had minimal Union presence during the Civil War. Slaveholders from other states even relocated to Texas with enslaved people to avoid emancipation. The Civil War ended in April 1865, but enslaved people in Texas remained in bondage because slaveholders withheld information about emancipation, and no federal forces were present to enforce it. On June 19, 1865, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with 2,000 federal troops and publicly read General Order No. 3, which announced that all enslaved people were free. This was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Approximately 250,000 enslaved people in Texas learned of their freedom that day. The delay was deliberately maintained by slaveholders who wanted to harvest one final cotton crop using slave labor. Formerly enslaved people began celebrating June 19th, or Juneteenth, as Freedom Day. The holiday spread throughout Black communities, but was largely ignored in mainstream American culture. Texas made Juneteenth a state holiday in 1980, but it took until 2021 for it to become a federal holiday, 156 years after the original event. The destruction of Black towns. Following emancipation and during Reconstruction, African Americans established numerous all-Black towns across the United States, particularly in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and other states. These towns represented economic independence, self-governance, and prosperity within segregated America. By 1920, over 50 all-Black towns existed. Towns like Rosewood, Florida, Wilmington, North Carolina, and numerous Oklahoma communities had thriving economies, Black-owned businesses, newspapers, schools, and local governments. White supremacists viewed these successful communities as threats to racial hierarchy. The destruction occurred through multiple methods, including organized racial violence, legal manipulation, and economic sabotage. In Rosewood, Florida, a white mob attacked in 1923, killing residents and burning the entire town after false accusations against a Black resident. In Wilmington, North Carolina, white supremacists staged a coup in 1898, overthrowing the legitimately elected biracial government, killing dozens of Black residents, and forcing thousands to flee. Economic sabotage included blocking access to capital, refusing to sell goods to Black businesses, and white-owned railroads bypassing Black towns. Legal tactics involved discriminatory zoning laws, eminent domain seizures, and denial of infrastructure improvements. Many towns were destroyed to make way for highways or public projects. The systematic elimination of these towns erased models of Black economic success and self-sufficiency, reinforcing narratives of Black dependence and inferiority, while robbing African Americans of generational wealth and community stability. Yasuke, the African samurai. Yasuke was an African man who became a samurai in feudal Japan during the late 16th century. He likely originated from Mozambique or Ethiopia and arrived in Japan in 1579 as a servant to Italian Jesuit missionary Alessandro Valignano. Yasuke's presence caused a sensation in Kyoto due to his height, estimated at over 6 feet, and dark skin, which most Japanese people had never seen. Oda Nobunaga, one of Japan's most powerful daimyo working to unify the country, heard about Yasuke and summoned him. Nobunaga was fascinated and initially didn't believe Yasuke's skin color was natural, ordering him to wash to see if the color would come off. Impressed by Yasuke's strength and bearing, Nobunaga took him into his service, granting him the status of samurai around 1581. Yasuke was given a residence, a katana, and a stipend, all markers of samurai rank. He learned Japanese language and customs and fought alongside Nobunaga in battles. When Nobunaga was betrayed and forced to commit seppuku in 1582, Yasuke fought in his defense. After Nobunaga's death, Yasuke was captured by enemy forces but was spared and returned to Jesuit missionaries. His subsequent fate remains unknown. Yasuke's story demonstrates African presence in Asian history and challenges Western-centric narratives about both African and Japanese history.